So what exactly do you think about the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel?
Well, I mean, like what I just said, that it was horrible, and it's always by the same logic that I'm giving you now. It's always evil to target innocent civilians. I don't believe civilians can be held responsible for the crimes of their government. This was, by the way, the Osama bin Laden logic, which I think would also be the logic of like Bill Clinton or George W. Bush or Barack Obama. But Osama bin Laden very explicitly said when he was asked, like, well, are you just going to target like U.S. military sites, or are you targeting U.S. civilians? It was an interview in the 90s before 9/11. Um, and he goes, no, civilians are fair game too, because you guys have regular elections and you guys vote for your government, and therefore you're responsible for the crimes that they commit. Now, I think that's the logic of a fanatic like Osama bin Laden, and that's not the logic that any of us should follow. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not true that people are responsible for the crimes of their government. I think that that same argument is used quite a bit by people on the pro-Israeli side when they say like, oh, they had an election in 2005 and Hamas won a plurality. Therefore, 20 years later, they have no rights. I think that's insane. So, okay, so Hamas had no right to go after civilians. It's horrible, and you see, these teenagers being killed, and the people you see the images of people who were held hostage for all this time. So it's like your heart breaks for those people. It's truly tragic. I do think that it was in many ways an indictment of so many different things. Like October 7th happening was an indictment of the entire occupation / siege of Gaza and the West Bank, for that matter. It was, I think, should have probably forever destroyed the legacy of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is, I mean, this isn't like George W. Bush, he was on the job for almost a year when 9/11 happened, but it was still kind of new, like it was still kind of in his first year of being president. Benjamin Netanyahu was the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history and had explicitly been like, I'm the tough right winger who's going to be tough on these Palestinians, who's going to like move away from the idea of coming to a two-state solution because this is what we need to keep us safe. Like the justification is like, I'm going to be hard on these motherfuckers because I know what it takes to keep us safe. And that culminates in the worst massacre in Israeli history. And then, I mean, the other big one is that, I mean, and it's not like I wouldn't even say an open secret at this point. It's just out in the open. He had this strategy of propping up Hamas for years. And so he had this strategy of propping up Hamas for a myriad of reasons. But a major part of it was that, look, man, as long as there's terrorists in power there's never going to be any pressure on us to give the Palestinians a state because, look, what are you telling me? I got to negotiate with them?
He was allowing Qatar money to float.
Insisting that Qatar money float to them. When the Qatar money dried up, sent the Mossad in to insist that it gets back to them. Hundreds of millions of dollars, briefcases in cash. And he said in his own words that the reason for doing this was his words were prop up Hamas, bolster Hamas, to keep them in power so that the West Bank and the Gazans were divided, and that the international community, as well as the liberal Jewish community in Israel, wouldn't be able to put pressure on them to make a deal.
But what are the options? So if he doesn't allow the money in, it also looks really bad for him. Because if he's not allowing the money in, that means he's not allowing the quote-unquote aid in to help the Palestinians.
Yeah, but Lex, I mean, the dynamic here, right, is from 2007 to today, Israel's had a full blockade around the country. They won't let potatoes in. They won't let sugar in. They won't. And the justification is because they're dual use. They can be used to make rockets as well as they can be used to feed starving children. So we can't let that in because it's dual use. But cash to Hamas? Does that not have dual usage? Like, is there nothing else that they can? So yeah, it's like, yes, when you have a full blockade around the country, you take on certain responsibilities. And I think this is, this is the essence of really the whole struggle here, which is very tough, I think, for the pro-Israel side to grapple with. But the bottom line is that Israel hasn't occupied Palestine for like a few months after a war, or even a couple of years after a war, while they're figuring out what we're going to do with them. It's been over 60 years. We're talking about a 1 week long war, or a day short of a week long war, in 1967. Israel's had control of them ever since. And much like in the same way that, like, if you kidnap someone and you lock them in your basement and you don't feed them, you murdered that person. So in other words, stated differently, you're not allowed to kidnap people and lock them in your basement. But once you do, you take on a responsibility to feed those people. You know what I mean? Like, you're not allowed to keep someone and not feed them. That is a worse charge than just keeping them. And so, yeah, anyway, I guess my point is, the solution to that, if you go like, well, I'm a bad guy if I fund Hamas, I'm a bad guy if I don't let the aid in, was to let the reputable international aid organizations bring aid in to the people of Gaza. Don't pressure the Qataris to send in briefcases full of cash. Allow internationally recognized, reputable human rights organizations who are lining up trying to do it. Stop turning them away and let them in. And this is just, it's so long past due. I mean, like, it's just, I'm not like defending Arab terrorism. It's I think it's really, it's a tragedy that the Arabs embraced terrorism. I don't think it's unique to them. And in fact, I think it was the Zionist militias who introduced terrorism to that part of the world. But there was also terrorism persists because it works. And this is true with state terrorism and with non-state terrorism. It's like terrorism has often worked for people. I think the thing, like early Yasser Arafat, I know, was very influenced by the Algerians, who, successfully kicked the French out at embracing terrorism. And it was almost like the major miscalculation of those Palestinian Arabs who did embrace terrorism was that this isn't the French. This isn't the French hanging out in some colony with their home country back home, where maybe a few acts of violence could work enough to, the liberal population back home is like, oh, I really didn't like the response to that terrorism. We killed so many people. Forget it. This is too much of a headache. Let's get out of here. The Zionist settlers were there to stay. They weren't going anywhere. They weren't going back to Eastern Europe. You know what I mean? They were just that. And so it's a tragedy that this whole thing went the way it did. But you always, whenever you're talking about like a conflict like this, the person who has the party who has the power is the one who needs to make concessions, and it's just indefensible that the status quo of the Palestinian people having no rights, literally no rights, being ruled by a government that they do not get to vote for or against, no right to do commerce with the outside world, no freedom of travel, no freedom of movement, no basic property rights. You can be kicked out of your home at any time, no right to a fair trial, no right to a lawyer, no right to a jury of your peers. I mean, the fact that has been the status quo since 1967 is just indefensible. And then in the context that has been the status quo, I guess I'm just not, even though I'm against it, it's kind of like when you're just lecturing about the way in which they resist this, I think it's very tough to be on a strong moral footing